The sun hung low over the Arizona plains like a molten coin, its glare turning the world into a haze of gold and fire. The wagon wheels creaked over the cracked earth, and every turn of the axle seemed to echo in the silence of the desert. Reverend Elijah Boone guided the mule reins with one hand, his other resting on the worn leather Bible beside him. Beside him sat his daughter Mary, 17, solemn-eyed, with a cotton bonnet pulled low against the burning light. They had been traveling for 3 days from the town of Bisbee, carrying 2 barrels of water, a crate of bandages, and a small wooden cross meant for a new chapel in the settlement of Dry Creek. The drought had withered nearly every life between the 2 towns. Wells had turned to dust, cattle lay in the fields like forgotten bones, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with thirst. Mary had grown up hearing her father preach that faith could move mountains. Yet as she looked at the endless desert, she wondered if faith could move clouds. "God tests us, child," Reverend Boone said, as if reading her thoughts. "The Lord sends trials not to break us, but to prove we're worthy of his reign." Mary nodded, though her lips were cracked and dry. She wasn't sure she understood why God's mercy always came wrapped in suffering. By late afternoon, the horizon began to change. What had been a flat, shimmering expanse darkened into a wall of swirling brown. A sandstorm was rising fast, too fast. The Reverend stood in the wagon bed and shaded his eyes. "Lord help us," he murmured. "We'll not make Dry Creek before that hits." The storm was a living thing, roaring toward them with the sound of 10,000 whispering voices. Mary felt her heart tighten. "Father, there's a ridge, there." She pointed to a jagged outline of stone a mile north. Something, perhaps ruins, perhaps shelter, rose out of the dunes like an ancient skeleton. They whipped the mule harder, the wagon lurching over broken stones. Wind clawed at them and the sky turned the color of old brass. The Reverend's hat flew away. Grit stung their faces like needles. When at last they reached the ridge, they found a half-collapsed mission built of adobe and timber. Its bell tower was shattered, the cross above it leaning as if it had grown weary of standing. "St. Catherine's," Elijah said, surprised. "I thought it burned in the war." The door groaned as he pushed it open. Inside, the air was cooler but heavy with dust. Candles had melted into puddles on the altar. Faded murals showed saints and angels, their faces cracked with age. And at the back, carved into the far wall, Mary saw 2 towering figures, warriors, each holding a staff shaped like lightning bolts. "The Apache once guarded this place," her father said softly, tracing a cross on his chest. "They called it sacred ground." The storm struck then, thunderous, blinding. The roof rattled as wind poured through the broken windows. Mary pressed against the wall, trembling. The Reverend began to pray aloud, his voice nearly drowned by the storm's rage. When lightning flashed through the door, it illuminated the carvings again. For an instant, the stone eyes of the twin warriors seemed to gleam, alive, watching. Mary caught her breath. "Father, look," she cried. But when Elijah turned, the light was gone. Only the endless howl of wind filled the mission. They huddled together beside the altar through the night, the storm battering the world outside. Mary closed her eyes and whispered a prayer she had never learned from her father's sermons. A prayer not to heaven, but to the earth itself, to whatever ancient power guarded this forsaken place. Far above them, lightning danced again across the ridge, striking the twin carvings. The air trembled. And for the first time in a century, deep beneath the cracked stone, something stirred. Morning came quietly, though the world outside was unrecognizable. The sandstorm had passed, leaving the desert covered in a thin veil of gold dust. The mule was gone, the wagon overturned, yet the old mission still stood, scarred but defiant, its cracked bell swaying gently in the wind. Mary was the first to wake. The light filtering through the shattered windows turned the room into a mosaic of amber and white. She rubbed her eyes and saw her father still asleep beside the altar, his hands folded over his chest, lips moving in half-formed prayers. The air was strangely still. No bird calls, no rustling of lizards, not even the faint hum of flies. Just silence, the kind that felt like a held breath. Mary stood and walked toward the wall where the twin carvings loomed. She had dreamt of them through the night, 2 immense figures rising out of sand and lightning, their voices like thunder and wind. In her dream, they had spoken in a tongue she didn't know, yet somehow understood. She remembered one phrase clearly, echoing still in her mind. "The land remembers what men forget." Now in daylight, the carvings seemed even more lifelike. The twin warriors were identical, broad-shouldered, strong-jawed, their eyes set with the calm of mountains. Each held a long staff, the ends carved into the shapes of fire and water. Mary reached out and brushed the dust from one figure's hand. The stone felt warmer than it should have. For a heartbeat, she thought it pulsed. "Elijah Boone," a man's voice shouted from outside. Her father startled awake. "Who's there?" A group of riders approached, 4 men, dust-streaked and armed. They were settlers from Dry Creek, their faces haggard from the storm. One of them, a big man with a red kerchief and a rifle slung over his shoulder, stepped forward. "Reverend, we saw your wagon down the ridge. Thought you might have been dead," he said. "You're a long way from home." Elijah smiled, though his eyes were wary. "God saw fit to lead us to shelter. We thank you kindly for your concern." The man nodded toward the carvings. "Strange place for a preacher to hole up. Folks say this mission's cursed. The Apaches called it the House of the Storm Twins. Built it over their sacred ground before the soldiers drove them off." Mary felt a chill trace down her spine. "Storm Twins?" she asked. "That's what the old stories say," another man replied. "2 giant spirits who guard the desert from intruders. They say if you defile the land, they wake up angry." Elijah gave a thin, dismissive smile. "Idle superstition. Only the Lord commands the wind and rain." The riders exchanged uneasy glances. "Maybe so," said the man in the kerchief, "but you'd best be careful. The ground's been shaken out this way. Folks hear things in the night. Drums, chanting. Could be Indians, could be worse." They left not long after, but the unease they brought lingered. Elijah began gathering their scattered supplies, muttering about getting back on the road. Mary, though, couldn't look away from the carvings. That evening, as the sky bled into a bruised red and violet, she found herself kneeling before the mural again. The faces of the twins glowed faintly in the dying light. She whispered, "If you're real, if you can hear me, the land is dying. Help us." The air grew colder. A wind swept through the broken doorway, swirling around her like a living thing. The candles on the altar flickered and went out. Then she heard it, a low rumble from deep beneath the floor, like distant thunder rolling underground. Dust fell from the ceiling. The carving shuddered, and from one of the twin staffs, a thin crack of blue light traced down the wall like lightning. Mary stumbled backward, heart pounding. "Father!" she screamed. Elijah rushed in, his face pale. "What happened?" Before she could answer, the crack sealed itself, the light fading into nothing. The silence returned. But outside, far beyond the horizon, the first clouds in months were gathering, dark, heavy, and full of promise. By nightfall, the desert was alive with sound again, an eerie, restless hum that seemed to rise from the ground itself. The wind had changed direction, blowing from the east now, warm and sharp as breath. The moon, nearly full, cast the old mission in silver and shadow. Reverend Boone had spent the evening repairing the wagon and gathering what little was left of their provisions. Mary sat by the altar, staring at the carvings, unable to shake what she had seen. The flash of blue light, the tremor under her feet, the sudden birth of clouds on the horizon. Her father tried to calm her. "It was lightning trapped in the stone, that's all. Storms do strange things. But father," she said softly, "the sky was clear when it happened." He hesitated. The words he wanted to speak, words of faith, of divine logic, died on his tongue. Instead, he tightened his jaw and looked away. "We leave at dawn. No more talk of heathen spirits." Mary said nothing. She could feel the heat pulsing faintly through the wall, as if something inside the stone was breathing. When her father finally fell asleep, Mary rose. The moonlight spilling through the cracked windows painted the carvings in a ghostly glow. The eyes of the twin warriors shimmered faintly like embers under ash. She approached them, drawn by an invisible pull. "If you can hear me," she whispered, "I didn't mean to wake you. But our land is dying. The people are dying. Please, show me what I should do." The ground quivered. A deep, resonant sound filled the air. A voice like the echo of mountains shifting. Dust rained from the ceiling. Mary stumbled backward, clutching her chest as the wall before her began to crack down the center, the twin carvings splitting apart. From within the stone, light spilled, blue and gold and white. It poured over the walls like water, and in that blinding glow, 2 immense figures stepped forward. They were not made of flesh, but of something older, stone, flame, and storm woven together. The taller of the 2 had eyes like molten amber. The others shimmered with the cool blue of river ice. Each bore a staff crowned with lightning. Their hair moved like smoke, their skin marked with tribal sigils that glowed faintly in the dark. Mary fell to her knees, trembling but unafraid. The taller one spoke first, his voice deep as thunder. "You prayed, little one." The land heard. "We are the answer you summoned." Mary looked up at them, awe and fear tangled in her chest. "You're the guardians, the twins of the storm." The other spirit, the one with blue eyes, nodded. "Long have we slept. Men built temples and broke them. The rivers turned to dust. The earth calls for balance once more. My father says only God commands the rain." Mary whispered. The amber-eyed twins' expression softened. "Your God and our earth are not enemies. They are two names for the same breath." Outside lightning flashed, not in the sky but along the ground, arcing from cactus to stone. The air smelled of rain, sharp and clean. "What do you want of me?" she asked. "You are the bridge," said the blue-eyed twin. "The world of men has forgotten how to listen. You will carry our message. But first the storm must come, and only we can bring it." Before she could respond, Elijah burst into the chapel, his lantern swinging. "Mary, what in heaven's He stopped dead." The lantern clattered to the floor, oil spilling. The two giants towered above them, their forms bending the light around them like heat. Elijah's voice broke. "Begone, demons! I cast you out in the name of the Lord." The amber-eyed twin turned to him slowly. "Man of words, do not mistake guardians for devils." The reverend raised his cross high, shouting scripture, but the wind rose and snuffed the lantern's flame. The chapel doors blew open, and a gust of warm rain swept inside, the first in nearly a year. Mary looked from her father to the twins, her heart torn between faith and wonder. The blue-eyed one stepped closer, his voice soft as the falling rain. "Do not fear, daughter of man. Tonight the desert remembers its gods." Rain fell softly through the open roof, hissing as it struck the hot stones. The scent of wet dust filled the air, a perfume the desert had forgotten. Mary lifted her face toward it, eyes closed, her lips parting as the first cool drops touched her skin. But her father stood rigid, his Bible clutched like a weapon. The giants, Taji and Nantan, though their names were still unknown to her, watched him with patient stillness. Their presence filled the ruined chapel like thunder fills a canyon, immense yet solemn. "This is blasphemy," Reverend Boone said, his voice trembling with equal parts awe and defiance. "You mock the Lord with your illusions. I command you, depart." The blue-eyed twin Nantan tilted his head slightly. "You command the wind, preacher? The rain?" Elijah's face flushed. "I command nothing, but the Almighty does, and he shall strike down every false idol." The amber-eyed twin, Taji, lowered his gaze to Mary. "Your father's heart is stone, but his daughter still hears the song beneath the sand. That is why we came." Mary looked up, uncertain. "Why now? Why to me?" "Because the balance is broken," Taji said. His voice rolled like distant thunder. "The rivers have been stolen, the mountains carved open. Man has forgotten gratitude. The earth bleeds, and soon the sky will too." Elijah stepped between them. "Enough of this heathen witchcraft. Mary, away from them!" But Mary did not move. She stared at the glowing patterns that spiraled along Taji's arms, symbols that looked like rivers winding across maps. "What do you mean the earth bleeds?" Nantan extended a massive hand. As he did, the air shimmered and a vision appeared, a mirage come to life. The ground between them turned transparent, showing what lay beneath the surface. Dry riverbeds, fractured roots, bones of animals long dead. Then deeper still, the shimmer of silver and gold veins ripped open by picks and dynamite. "The settlers' hunger has torn the heart from the desert," Nantan said. "They dig where they should kneel. Soon the sky will avenge the ground and the flood will come." Mary stared, transfixed. "A flood? But there's no rain here anymore." "There will be," Taji said. Too much, the vision faded. Mary's knees weakened. "Can it be stopped?" "There is still one path," said Nantan. "At dawn, the sun will touch the mountain of glass, the one your people call Mirror Peak. There the old altar sleeps. Blood of the willing must awaken it, or all will drown." Elijah's voice thundered over theirs. "You speak lies. You tempt us with false prophecy." Taji's eyes flared brighter. "You speak to forces older than your words. Once your kind prayed beside ours. Now you build fences and churches and call the wind your enemy." The walls trembled. A crack split the floor beneath the altar. Mary clutched her father's sleeve. "Stop!" she cried. "Please, don't hurt him." At her voice, the storm outside softened. The twins' eyes dimmed. Taji knelt so that his immense face was level with hers. "We harm no innocent. But listen, child, when the moon stands over Mirror Peak, the choice will come. The old gods cannot save man without man's will. You must decide who you serve, the word or the wind." Mary felt her throat tighten. "I don't understand." "You will," said Nantan gently. When the desert breathes again, the twins stepped back toward the wall. The light around them pulsed once, twice, and then they dissolved into the stone, their carved forms returning to stillness. The chapel was silent except for the soft patter of rain. Elijah dropped to his knees, shaking. "Mary, we must leave this place tonight before their evil roots itself deeper." But Mary did not move. Her eyes lingered on the carvings, on the faint shimmer that still clung to their edges like the last flicker of a dying flame. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled again, not in warning this time, but in promise. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The desert steamed under a pale gold sun, every rock glistening as if newly forged. The air was heavy with the scent of wet sage and the faint sweetness of cactus bloom, life returning where death had lingered too long. Reverend Elijah Boone stood outside the ruined mission, staring across the vast horizon. He had prayed through the night, yet the words had tasted hollow. He could not forget the vision, the giants, the thunder, the trembling of the earth. He told himself it was a trick of exhaustion, of fear and fever, yet deep down he knew that the world had shifted. Something had changed. Behind him, Mary stepped out into the light. Her bonnet was gone, her hair undone, and her eyes seemed brighter, steadier. "The land looks alive again," she said quietly. They told the truth. Elijah turned sharply. "Do not speak of them." "But Father, no." His voice cracked like a whip. "They are not angels, Mary, they are deceivers. The devil wears many faces, sometimes even the face of deliverance." Mary looked down, her fingers tightening on the wooden cross that hung around her neck. If they were devils, would they have brought the rain? Her father hesitated. That question had haunted him since the storm passed. All through the night he had listened to the rain drumming on the roof, his heart torn between gratitude and dread. The scriptures said the Lord sent rain upon the just and unjust alike. But could he truly work through the hand of heathen idols? He wiped sweat from his brow. Rain can be a test as well as a gift. Mary said nothing more. She turned her gaze to the mountains, the farthest one glittering faintly in the sun. Mirror Peak. Even from this distance it shimmered like glass. That afternoon they repaired the wagon as best they could. The mule miraculously had returned, ribs sharp beneath its hide but still alive. Mary took that as another sign of grace. Elijah saw only coincidence. As they worked, the sky began to darken again, not with storm clouds but with dust. The air grew tense. A group of riders appeared on the horizon, the same men who had come the day before. They dismounted near the chapel, rifles slung and eyes wary. "Reverend," called the man in the red kerchief, "you best come see this." Elijah and Mary followed them to the ridge overlooking the dry riverbed. What they saw below turned Mary cold. The ground had split open in the night. A fissure ran for nearly a mile, deep and jagged like a wound. From its depths faint wisps of steam rose, and there, glinting among the rocks, were streaks of silver ore, the kind that men killed for. "Miners from Dry Creek will be here by sundown," the man said. "They'll dig this place to the bone." Elijah frowned. "That's not our concern. We move on." Mary's voice was barely a whisper. "But they'll tear the land again." The twins said. The man turned. "Twins?" Elijah shot her a warning glance, then forced a laugh. "She speaks of the carvings in the chapel. Old legends." Nothing more, but Mary's eyes remained fixed on the fissure. The wind carried a sound from its depths, a low, rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat beneath the earth. That night, Elijah could not sleep. He sat by the campfire, his Bible open but unread. The flames danced across the pages, turning holy words into shadows. Every verse he read about false idols only deepened his confusion. He remembered the storm, the miracle of rain, and the warmth he'd felt when it touched his face. Not fear, not evil, something else. Something vast and humbling. Mary approached quietly and sat beside him. "You heard them too, didn't you?" He didn't answer. "They said I would have to choose," she whispered. Between the word and the wind, Elijah closed the Bible, his hand trembled. "And which will you choose, Mary?" She looked toward Mirror Peak, now a faint silhouette beneath the rising moon. "I think the word and the wind might be the same thing. If only men could stop shouting long enough to listen." Elijah stared into the fire, and for the first time in years he did not know how to pray. By the time the sun slipped behind the mountains, the world had turned the color of copper. The faint promise of rain still lingered in the air, though none had fallen since morning. The fissure below the ridge glowed faintly in the twilight, its edges pulsing with a dull red light, as though the desert itself were bleeding fire. Mary and her father camped within the broken walls of the mission once more. The mule rested under what remained of the bell tower. The men from Dry Creek had left hours ago to fetch more tools and horses, their greed lit like torches in their eyes. Mary sat alone near the altar, tracing her finger over the carvings of the Storm Twins. The stone still thrummed with faint warmth. She whispered, "You said the flood would come, but how do I stop it?" Her words were swallowed by the stillness. No answer came. Outside, the desert wind rose, a low, moaning sound that seemed almost human. Then suddenly it was joined by something else, the distant echo of hooves. Elijah stood, hand going instinctively to his Bible. "They're back already." The riders came fast and without lanterns, their silhouettes black against the dim horizon. When they dismounted, Mary saw the glint of weapons. "Evening, Reverend," the man in the red kerchief called. "We're claiming the vein down by the ridge. You and your girl'll need to clear out. We'll be blasting by dawn." Elijah frowned. "This land is sacred. You'd defile it for silver?" The man spat. "Sacred don't fill bellies, preacher. God put treasure in the ground for men to take." Mary stepped forward. "If you dig there, you'll bring ruin. The ground isn't just stone, it's alive." The men laughed. "Alive? You've been drinking cactus milk, girl." But the laughter died quickly. The wind had changed, hotter now, heavier, carrying with it the faint rumble of thunder. Elijah felt the hairs rise on his neck. "Mary," inside. Before she could move, the fissure below the ridge split wider with a sound like the tearing of cloth. Light burst upward, blue and gold swirling into the clouds. The men stumbled back, cursing, then came the voice. Not from the sky, not from the earth, but from everywhere at once. "You were warned." The sound shook the ground beneath their feet. The mules screamed. The men scrambled for their rifles. Lightning struck once, twice, igniting the sand. Mary fell to her knees. "Please," she cried. "Don't hurt them. They don't understand." The storm answered with silence. Then the blue-eyed twin, Nantan, rose from the fissure, his form woven from mist and lightning. His gaze fell upon Mary. "You asked for guidance. Now the test begins." Elijah shielded his daughter, trembling. "No more." Nantan's expression softened. "This is not punishment, man of faith. It is choice." He raised his hand, and in the air appeared a vision, two paths carved in light. One led to the mountain of glass glowing faintly under the moon. The other led to the fissure where fire churned below. "The altar must be awakened before dawn," Nantan said. "If the miners break the seal before you reach it, the desert will drown." Mary's voice shook. "I don't know the way." "You will." Taji's voice joined his brother's, deep and warm like rolling thunder. "But you must go alone. The courage of one heart is greater than the faith of 100 tongues." Mary's breath caught. "Alone?" Elijah's hand gripped hers. "You can't," but Nantan's gaze turned to the preacher. "You must let her go. The storm obeys no man's scripture." The twins faded, leaving only their words and a faint scent of rain. For a long moment, neither father nor daughter spoke. Then Elijah whispered, "I will not lose you to this madness." Mary squeezed his hand. "You won't lose me, Father. But if I don't go, we'll all be lost." She took the lantern, the water skin, and the cross from around her neck. The light from the fissure flickered against her face as she stepped into the desert night. Above her, the clouds began to gather once more, dark, heavy, waiting. The desert at night was a world of ghosts. Every cactus seemed to whisper. Every gust of wind carried the memory of footsteps long vanished. Mary walked alone beneath the rising moon, her lantern swaying in rhythm with her heartbeat. Ahead, the land sloped upward toward the distant shimmer of Mirror Peak, a jagged mountain that caught the starlight like a blade. The fissure's glow behind her dimmed, but she could still feel its pulse in the earth beneath her feet, slow, alive. Waiting. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. You can't face this alone. The twins' voice followed, deeper and older. The courage of one heart. She kept walking. By midnight, the wind grew colder. Clouds gathered again, veiling the stars. When lightning flared, she saw something moving in the distance. A shape too large for a man, too silent for a beast. Her breath quickened. Who's there? No answer. Only the soft hiss of rain beginning to fall. She pressed onward, her boots sinking into the damp sand. The path wound through a dry riverbed littered with bones, animal remains bleached white by the sun. They crunched faintly under her feet. At last she reached the base of Mirror Peak. The mountain's surface shone like glass, reflecting her lantern light in 1,000 trembling shards. It looked alive, shimmering as though made of frozen water. Mary touched the rock and warmth bloomed under her palm. The twins had said an altar slept here, but all she saw was smooth stone. What am I supposed to do? She whispered. The wind rose in reply, carrying faint words, half chant, half thunder. She couldn't understand them, but her heart seemed to. Her fingers began tracing the markings on the stone, following grooves too perfect to be natural. They spiraled inward toward a small hollow in the center, round, dark, and cold. Then she saw it. A symbol, faint but unmistakable. The same lightning-shaped mark carved into the twin staffs. This must be it, she breathed. As she knelt, the wind howled louder. Sparks of blue fire danced across the rock, coiling into the hollow. She reached for her cross, clutching it tight. God, if you are listening, guide me. If they are your servants, show me. If not, give me strength to stand. Her words vanished into the roar of the wind. Then came a blinding flash. The fire burst upward, a column of blue-white light that twisted into the shape of wings. Mary fell back, shielding her face. The ground trembled. From within the fire, she heard a sound like a heartbeat, slow and deep, echoing through the mountain itself. And then a voice. Not the twins this time, something older. Child of dust and breath. Why do you call the storm? Mary's voice shook. The land is dying. I want to save it. To save it, it must burn. Creation is born of fire and flood alike. The light flared brighter. She could see shapes within it, faces of people long gone, spirits of the desert, all watching her. Mary rose to her knees. Then tell me what to do. The fire that heals must be carried by mortal hands. Take it and bear its pain. Only then will the river rise again. She stared at the hollow where the flame danced. It pulsed like a living heart. Instinct told her that to touch it would mean agony, maybe death. But she remembered the faces of the thirsty children in Dry Creek, the fields cracked with drought, the way her father's faith had faltered in silence. She reached out. The fire met her skin like ice and lightning all at once. Pain seared through her arm, but she did not pull back. Instead, the flame coiled around her hand, sinking into her flesh. The mark of the twins, the lightning sigil, burned itself into her palm. When the light faded, the world was still. The altar glowed faintly, its center now empty. The sacred fire lived inside her. Mary fell to the ground, trembling but alive. Her lantern lay shattered beside her, its glass melted. She whispered, "It's done." Far below, thunder rolled again. The fissure by the mission roared to life, brighter than before. The miners would be arriving soon, and the storm twins were stirring once more. Mary lifted her marked hand toward the mountain wind. It shimmered faintly with blue light. "The courage of one heart," she murmured. "Then let that be mine," and with that, she began the long journey back through the storm. The storm was already waiting for her when she reached the ridge. Dark clouds towered over the desert like mountains of smoke, veins of lightning writhing through them. The fissure below the mission glowed hotter, red and blue fire mingling in a violent dance. The wind carried the scent of metal and rain, and beneath it something older, like the breath of the earth itself. Mary stumbled forward, clutching her burned hand to her chest. The mark still glowed faintly, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. Every few steps a spark leapt from her fingertips. The mission was in chaos. The men from Dry Creek had returned, shovels and rifles in hand. They shouted orders to one another, their lanterns flickering in the gale. Elijah Boone stood in the doorway, his coat whipping in the wind. His Bible was open, but the words trembled in his hands. He saw his daughter approaching through the dust, her hair unbound, her palm burning with blue light. "Mary!" he called, running to her. What have you done? She fell into his arms, shaking. I found it, the altar. It gave me the fire. The fire? His voice broke between fear and disbelief. She looked up, her eyes reflecting the lightning overhead. The storm is coming, Father. The twins said I must choose before dawn or the desert will drown. Behind them, a miner shouted, Blast ready. Another answered, Light it. Mary turned in horror. No, stop. But the fuse was already burning. A heartbeat later, the explosion tore through the fissure. The ground convulsed. Fire erupted from the wound in the earth, shooting into the sky in a pillar of light. The men were thrown backward like leaves. When the smoke cleared, two enormous figures rose from the pit, Taji and Nantan, their forms blazing with fury. They have broken the seal, Nantan's voice thundered. Now the flood wakes. From the horizon came a sound like 1,000 drums, rain, falling in sheets. Lightning ripped the sky apart. Water poured from the heavens, striking the earth so hard it steamed. Mary clutched her father's arm. We have to stop it! How? He shouted over the roar. The fire. They said it can heal or destroy. She looked down at her glowing palm. The mark had spread, curling up her wrist like veins of light. I can give it back, but I don't know what will happen to me. Elijah's eyes widened. No, you can't. The choice is hers, Taji said, his voice deep and sorrowful. If she returns the fire, the land will live, but her spirit will join the storm. If she keeps it, the flood will swallow all and balance will die. Elijah dropped to his knees in the rain, his Bible falling open in the mud. Lord, show mercy. Mary stared at the sky where lightning and clouds swirled like living things. Her heart felt torn between two worlds, the one her father preached of and the one the earth itself whispered to her through wind and flame. She turned to him, tears mixing with rain. You once said God tests us to prove we're worthy of his rain. Maybe this is the test. Elijah gripped her shoulders. If he asks for your life, he is no God I know. She smiled faintly. Then maybe he's not asking for my life. Maybe he's asking for my faith. Thunder cracked overhead, deafening. The twins raised their staffs. Mary took a trembling breath and stepped forward, into the fire still blazing from the fissure. The heat was unbearable, yet she did not stop. Her marked hand shone brighter and brighter until it was pure light. Mary, Elijah screamed, but the wind stole his voice. She pressed her palm against the heart of the flame. For an instant, everything was silent. The rain hung motionless in the air. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a sound like 1,000 bells breaking, the light exploded outward. The flood stopped mid-fall. The lightning turned to silver mist, and the fissure sealed itself with a hiss of steam. When the brilliance faded, Mary was gone. Only the faint imprint of her hand remained on the stone, glowing softly like a star half buried in the earth. Elijah fell to his knees, the rain now gentle on his face. Above, the twins watched in silence. The balance is restored, Nantan said, and the courage of one heart endures, Taji replied. They turned toward the mountains and dissolved into cloud and thunder, leaving the preacher alone beneath the calm, newborn sky. For a long time there was only silence. The rain had ceased. The thunder had rolled away, leaving behind a desert reborn yet grieving. Steam rose from the fissure where Mary had stood, curling upward like incense from a sacred fire. The glow of her handprint pulsed faintly in the stone, beating like a heart that refused to die. Reverend Elijah Boone knelt before it, drenched and shaking. His Bible lay open in the mud, its pages torn and blurred. Words he had spoken 1,000 times, faith, mercy, resurrection, suddenly felt small and empty beside the sacrifice he had witnessed. He pressed his trembling fingers against the still warm rock. Mary, he whispered, my child, my brave girl. A soft wind moved through the ruins, carrying the faint sound of water trickling. He looked up. From the edge of the fissure, a stream had begun to flow, clear and pure, winding down into the valley below. The desert, once a graveyard of dust, was drinking again. The miners who had survived the blast stood in stunned silence. Their faces were pale, eyes wide. One dropped his rifle and fell to his knees. Another crossed himself without thinking. What happened? One finally stammered. Elijah rose slowly, the fire of something ancient burning behind his weary eyes. A debt was paid, he said, by one who had more faith than all of us. The men looked from him to the glowing mark in the stone, their fear mingling with awe. None dared speak further. By nightfall, the stream had become a river. It wound its way across the desert floor like a silver serpent, glittering under the moonlight. Flowers bloomed along its edges, tiny blossoms of blue and gold that hadn't been seen in decades. Coyotes howled, not in hunger but in song. The preacher stood alone outside the mission, his soaked coat flapping in the night breeze. The air was cool and sweet, heavy with the scent of new life. Yet he felt hollow, as though the miracle itself had carved him open. He lifted his gaze to the heavens. The clouds had broken, revealing a sky vast and wild. 2 stars shone brighter than the rest side by side, one gold, one blue. They flickered like watchful eyes. Taji, he murmured. Nantan. The air shimmered faintly before him. The twins' forms emerged, not as giants this time, but as tall men woven of mist and starlight. Their expressions were solemn. "Preacher," said Nantan, "your daughter's spirit has joined the storm." Her courage rekindled the balance. "The rivers will flow again and the land will heal." Elijah's voice was a whisper. "Can she return?" Tazi shook his head. "The flame that saves cannot be called back. But she is not lost. When the rains fall, when the wind sings across the dunes, she will be there. The desert remembers its children." Elijah's eyes filled with tears, though he did not weep. "She believed you," he said softly. "When I would not." Nantan's gaze softened. "She believed in more than us. She believed that faith need not be chained to names. She saw the same light shining in both heaven and earth." The preacher bowed his head. "Then I will carry her light until I meet her again." The twins inclined their heads, their forms fading into the starlit mist. Their last words lingered in the air like thunder without sound. When men forget again, the storm will remember. Elijah stood there long after they were gone. The river murmured beside him, and the night sky shimmered with quiet promise. He took off his hat, held it to his chest and prayed, not in the stern voice of a preacher, but in the trembling, honest voice of a father. "Thank you," he whispered, "for the courage you placed in her heart, and for the rain that carries her name." From far off, lightning flashed once over Mirror Peak, soft, golden, like a blessing, and for the first time in his life, Reverend Elijah Boone felt no divide between heaven and earth, only silence and light and the whisper of his daughter's voice riding the wind. The word and the wind are the same. Dawn came quietly, without thunder or wind, only the hush that follows a storm when the world is new. The first light crept across the desert, spilling over the mission ruins and the newborn river that wound like a ribbon of glass through the valley. The air was cool and clean, the earth soft beneath its thin quilt of green. Even the stones seemed to breathe again. Reverend Elijah Boone stood on the ridge where his daughter had vanished. His coat was torn, his hat gone, but his eyes were clear for the first time in years. He had spent the long night in silence, watching the stars drift like lanterns above the wet earth. Every now and then he thought he heard her, Mary's voice, soft as rain on stone, whispering through the desert grass. Below, the miners were packing their things. Whatever greed had driven them here had died with the storm. None spoke of silver or claims anymore. They only looked at the river in quiet disbelief before riding away, each one glancing back once as if leaving holy ground. Elijah descended the ridge slowly, his boots sinking into the damp soil. The fissure where the earth had split was gone, sealed smooth by some unseen hand. In its place grew wildflowers, blue and gold, the same hues that had burned in the twins' eyes. He knelt and touched one, its petals trembling beneath his fingers. "She did this," he murmured. "My Mary." As he stood, a shadow passed overhead. He looked up to see a hawk circling, its wings flashing gold in the rising sun. For a heartbeat, the bird's cry sounded almost human, almost familiar. Elijah smiled through tears. He turned toward the chapel. It stood steadier now, though still half ruined. The carvings of the twin guardians had changed. Where before they had stood apart, now their staffs crossed at the center, forming a single symbol of balance. And between them, faint but clear, was a new figure, a young woman with one hand raised, light shining from her palm. Mary. Elijah sank to his knees before the wall. His hands trembled as he reached out, touching the carving's edge. "The stone was warm. I was a blind man," he whispered. "You showed me what faith truly means. Not in walls or words, but in the courage to love what we don't understand." For a long while he stayed there, head bowed, the sunlight slowly spilling over him. When he rose again, he carried his daughter's cross around his neck. The metal, once dull, now glimmered faintly with the same blue fire that had marked her hand. He walked down to the river and stepped into its cool water. It lapped gently at his boots, flowing westward toward the canyons. The reflection of the morning sun danced across the ripples like living flame. He looked toward the distant mountains, their peaks crowned with mist. Somewhere beyond them, he imagined, the twins kept watch, guarding the balance Mary had restored. The preacher lifted his face to the sky. "You were right, child," he said softly. "The word and the wind are the same, and I will speak both from this day on." As the sun rose higher, the desert seemed to awaken fully. Flowers opening, birds returning, life stirring in every hidden hollow. The drought had ended. Elijah turned back to the mission once more. He would rebuild it, not as a church of walls and sermons, but as a sanctuary for all who wandered between faiths, the kind of place where heaven and earth could meet without fear. He smiled faintly. "The house of the Storm Twins," he said, "and of the girl who brought back the rain." A gentle breeze swept through the valley, carrying the scent of sage and blossoms. It tugged at his coat, ruffled his hair, and whispered softly in his ear, words only he could hear. "I'm still here, Father." Elijah closed his eyes, letting the warmth of the sun wash over him. The river murmured, the wind sang, and the sky opened wide above a world made whole again. The desert, once barren, was alive, and somewhere in the clouds the storm smiled.